we have with us Honorable Shri Ranil Wickremesinghe, former Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, and also may mention that he has been associated with the Indian Ocean Conference right from the beginning. In the first 4 editions, he was the chair of the Organizing Committee. He continues to be a member of the Organizing Committee of the Indian Ocean Conference. Excellency, please.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, my friend Ram Mahadeva, without whom this conference may not have been possible, Sri Lanka's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Professor G.L. Peiris. Maritime trade between Arab and Indian sailors was flourishing even before the first references to it in the Shapta Brahmana, the Indian text of sacred knowledge. From then until the 16th century, the sea and land routes of the Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula interlinked Asia, Africa, and Europe, forming a critical chain of supply. After a lapse of a few hundred years, today, the Western Indian Ocean is regaining its strategic position. It is therefore fitting that this Indian Ocean Conference is held in the U.A.E., a key player in the Indian Ocean region and outside. I thank the U.A.E. government, which celebrated its 50 years of independence, for the hospitality afforded to all of us. Since our 4th conference in Maldives, an unprecedented paradigm shift is taking place in the Indian Ocean. The dynamics and intersections of ecology, the economy, and the COVID-19 epidemic have surfaced new transnational security challenges to the Indian Ocean region, the IOR, amidst intensifying geopolitical competitions. As a result, regional economies will undergo fundamental structural changes, having far-reaching impact on the future of this region. Climate change is occurring much faster than predicted and may cross the global warming level of 1.5 degrees centigrade in the next decade. The IPCC Assessment Report number 6, Climate Change 2021, the physical science basis, has revised the time frame for global zero emissions. The Indian Ocean is the most rapidly warming ocean in the world. South Asia will be the most detrimentally affected sub-region, where the retreat of the Himalayas, which feed 10 major rivers, will be catastrophic. Rising sea levels will put many coastal areas in South Asia at the risk of flooding. The anticipated plight of the Maldives is already known. Yet, despite significant progress in renewables in Asia, China, India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Vietnam, the target dates for eliminating emission goes beyond 2050. Given that economic growth in the region is being powered by India, Indonesia, and Bangladesh, we are caught at an intersection where the economy and ecology comes together. Coal is required by these countries for sustained economic growth. Yet, the utilization of coal beyond 2050 will accelerate global warming. The Glasgow COP26 World Leaders Summit's breakthrough agenda, with its prolonged discussions on phase out and phase down, further highlighted the predicament of this region. Even if emission cuts begin immediately, the GDP shortfall will be between 3 to 12%. These cross-cutting challenges of ecology and economy have been brutally intersected by COVID-19 pandemic, which has caused a global economic slowdown, a possibility that was unthinkable at our last conference in 2019. Thus, the economic costs of achieving net zero emissions are crippled by the economic cost of COVID-19. The devastation of COVID-19 on human health and well-being have been compounded by the adverse effects of climate change in our region. In fact, the erratic monsoons, increasing droughts, and reduction of fish stocks arising from the changes to ocean water is poised to bring about food scarcity in the coming years. And of course, the strain on health systems and public finances are and will be endless, given the persistent mutations of the virus. The total global economic effects continue to mount. We are all aware of how the recurrent lockdowns have driven large numbers of people into poverty, and many others who are on the threshold of middle class to subsistence level. The overloaded health systems are neglecting the treatment of other illnesses and diseases. Therefore, most countries are increasingly vulnerable to other epidemics that easily become pandemics. The national education systems are disrupted. Furthermore, the resources for education in some countries are being reduced to increase the allocations for health. It is also disrupting the social fabric of all countries, including an increase in reports of addiction and domestic violence. There will be an accrual of these and further costs given the culmination of the destructive impact of the pandemic in escalating social and political tensions. According to the IMF, estimates of the economic consequences of the pandemic include: 1. The per capita income of many countries in the IOR will stay below pre-pandemic levels for several years. 2. Rising debt levels with less room for potential borrowings. 3. Sharp reductions of revenue. And 4. Currency depreciations. The rise of US interest rates will further add to the debt burden of these economies. Yet, apart from these economic shocks, the loss to Asia from climate change is 5 to 6 times greater than our Western counterparts. The ensuring human displacement, migration, and construction of new human habitation caused by the ecological changes will be an intolerable burden on the affected countries in a region given their limited resources to combat climate change. Depressing as it is, we need to understand that a further downturn of our economies will reduce the resources for development already being eaten up by the increasing ecological and pandemic costs in an intersecting downward spiral. Yet, we cannot discuss the IOR without accounting for another intersection, that of geopolitics. The simmering power rivalries between the US and China in the IOR. This picture becomes even more complicated by the addition of AUKUS military alliance, which also covers the Indian Ocean. These developments in an increasingly multipolar world order will bring about regional instability in the Indian Ocean. The entanglement of great power rivalry in the Indian Ocean risks removing the focus on the public health shortfalls, digital inequalities, education disparities, unemployment, and social fragmentation in some of our countries. The end result will be a further destabilization of the IOR. A post-COVID-19 global economic turnaround will be determined by the time frame of the vaccine rollout, not only in advanced countries, but in all countries. The COVAX arrangements to supply vaccines have been wrecked by the advanced economies capturing the vaccine market and stockpiling vaccines. India's output is required for domestic needs. Therefore, the emerging and developing economies of the IOR are lagging behind. Some have yet to vaccinate half its population. The low vaccine rates in southern Africa led to the emergence of Omicron variant that is currently reaching the shores of many countries. Thus, ironically, the output of the advanced economies, which benefited from an early vaccine supply, are forecast to exceed the pre-pandemic level output. Never have countries become more conscious of their interlinkages to and dependencies on one another. The delay in vaccine supply for IOR countries, as well as the delays in providing financial policy support, will result in a medium-term output losses. The resulting divergence in the economic development prospects between advanced economies and the IOR economies will only widen the gap that has to be bridged by the region's economy. Thus, the emerging picture is not at all favorable to the IOR, which is already failing behind on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. The intersecting economic setbacks from COVID-19 and the impediments from accelerated climate change, as well as the US-China rivalry, have a potential to becoming a critical drag on this region that could prevent its potential to be the next global economic growth pole. In such a scenario, the growing presence of advanced economies of Europe as outside players in the region could result in a throwback to the 17th and 18th century Indian Ocean scenario, with more powerful outside powers dominating the weakened Indian Ocean states. This is a wake-up call for our region. For effective regional cooperation, the lack of regional architecture and its underpinning structures were discussed exhaustively at our third conference in Hanoi. The need for new cooperative architecture was also highlighted at the Goa Maritime Conference conclave recently. We have to now move forward without delay. We have to address the lack of complementary among our regional economies to bring about economic cooperation and trade integration. The IOR is the least trade integrated region in the world. Diverse economic cooperation structures will require multi-layered regionalism. We have also to focus on the role of IORA. The southern and the East African countries of the IOR have sub-regional economic cooperation arrangements as well as the African Trade Agreement. The ASEAN countries are all members of RCEP. In addition, some are also members of the CGP-TPP. This sub-region is covered by GCC. The most populous and important sub-region from Iran to Bangladesh is left uncovered. India will become the second largest global economy, while Bangladesh and Pakistan will also be leading economies by 2050. The SAARC has yet to hold the next summit. Much more ground has to be covered before BIMSTEC reaches this stage. Without a trade agreement covering this sub-region, there can be no meaningful economic cooperation in the IOR. Such a trade agreement need not be as difficult as the search for the Holy Grail. Establishing a regional architecture to promote regional agenda to address intersecting challenges of the IOR's economic cooperation, climate action, geopolitical security, and now the global pandemic must be our priority. A regional agenda which includes the following points. 1. UN General Assembly discussions on COVID-19 to be continued to reach an agreement on a common agenda and a protocol for the mitigation of pandemic at global and national level. B. Negotiations with the IMF to provide additional fiscal space for heavily indebted regional economies. 3. A demand for action to immediately establish a US $1 trillion climate change fund. This is really pocket money because the cost of climate change is supposed to be about $100 trillion US dollars. D. A formulation of a two-pronged approach to address decarbonization by accelerating decarbonization both on the basis of per capita income emissions as well as countrywide emissions. The IOR regional agenda must be strong enough to ensure stability in the Indian Ocean by preventing militarization. Asia is at the starting line of an arms race, with emphasis on aircraft carriers, nuclear-powered submarines, and fifth-generation combat aircraft. If ignored, such a race would divert much-needed funds for climate change. Therefore, the regional agenda must include effective maritime governance, including freedom of navigation and undersea cables. It must be an agenda to ensure stability by preventing militarization. This is IOR's fifth conference. Given the uncertainties of the future, this is when we should commence to walk the talk. On flanks of the IOR are the APEC and the African Agenda 2063. Without an architecture of regional cooperation to implement an integrated and effective regional agenda for climate action, economic growth, regional security, and pandemic mitigation, IOR's aspiration to be the next global economic growth pole will never be fulfilled. Therefore, we must act without delay. The starting point is the need for a summit of all Indian Ocean leaders sooner than later. The fate of the Indian Ocean is in our hands. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellency, can you take a couple of questions?
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Excellency, for especially highlighting the challenge of big power rivalry in the region so candidly and so openly. And as rightly said, it is not only causing regional instability, but also impacting adversely the countries in the region. And also thank you for laying out a roadmap for Indian Ocean region. Friends, we can have a couple of questions. Yes, Asha Jadeja, you can go ahead. Switch it on.
Thank you, Ranil. A question I have is that as the world moves right now from a unipolar to what many of us, at least in the US, think it's moving to a bipolar state, is there any way that smaller countries in the Indian Ocean can take certain actions which strengthens the possibility of a multipolar order as opposed to bipolar? Thank you, sir.
Yeah. I don't think it will be bipolar. It has to be multipolar. If you take the BRI, it's not only China. So many other countries are being involved. You take the Quad. Why was the Quad there? Because USA couldn't manage on its own. Then we have other players. So I think we have to strengthen ourselves to go for the multipolar world. And then this part of the world, the Indian Ocean, must be very, very specific. A good example is ASEAN. ASEAN centrality is now being accepted by the US. I think Indian government had put out saga for this area. So it's a question of making it multipolar and not bipolar. Is that rivalry that's coming up between US and China can be controlled if you have a multipolar world.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Excellency.